Hello friends. My name is Nikhil and today I'm going to tell you a story which will make you think. Let's start. Harold Shipman worked as a general practitioner in Hyde, a town in Greater Manchester, England. To the outside world, he appeared to be the ideal family doctor. Patients described him as calm, attentive, and dependable. He made house visits, listened patiently, and often formed long-term relationships with the families under his care. In the community, he was widely respected and trusted without hesitation. No one could have imagined the disturbing reality that lay beneath his professional image. However, Shipman's troubled patterns began long before he became a well-known GP. During his early medical career, warning signs already existed. He developed a serious addiction to pethidine, a powerful opioid painkiller. Instead of seeking help in a transparent way, he began stealing the drug from medical supplies, including from the very system meant to care for patients. This early abuse of his medical access revealed both a dependency and a willingness to cross ethical and legal boundaries. As his addiction escalated, his behavior eventually caught attention. In the mid-1970s, while working in Todmorden, his misconduct became impossible to ignore. He was discovered forging prescriptions in order to obtain controlled substances. This was not a minor professional mistake, it was a clear violation of medical law and ethics. As a result, he was forced to resign from his position. He was fined by authorities and sent for rehabilitation treatment to address his drug dependence. For a short time, it seemed as though his career might be over. Yet, Shipman managed to return to medicine after completing rehabilitation. Instead of being permanently removed from practice or closely monitored, he simply relocated and began working again as a general practitioner elsewhere. This ability to restart his career without long-term restriction would later become a critical factor in how his crimes went unnoticed for so long. What made Shipman's later actions so disturbing is how ordinary and controlled they appeared on the surface. Over time, he developed a method that was alarmingly simple and difficult to detect. He targeted mostly elderly patients, many of them women who lived alone. During home visits, he would administer a fatal dose of diamorphine, a medical-grade form of heroin used legitimately for pain relief in hospitals and end-of-life care. Because these patients were already vulnerable or ill, their deaths did not initially raise suspicion. In many cases, his presence in the home as a trusted doctor meant there were no witnesses, no alarms, and no immediate questions. Deaths were often regarded as natural causes, and certificates were signed by Shipman himself, giving him further control over the narrative surrounding his victims. This early pattern marked the beginning of what would later become one of the most infamous medical crime cases in British history, though at this stage, the true scale of his actions was still completely hidden.
Hello friends, my name is Nikhil and today I'm going to tell you a story which will make you think. Let's start. As Harold Shipman's crimes continued, his method became even more calculated and controlled. After each killing, he would return to his medical practice and quietly alter the patient's official records. Using his access to the clinic's computer system and handwritten notes, he would create false medical histories that suggested long-term illnesses or deteriorating health conditions. These fabricated records were carefully designed to make each death appear natural and medically expected. Shipman often inserted diagnoses such as heart disease, respiratory failure, or other chronic conditions that could easily explain a sudden passing, especially in elderly patients. By doing this, he removed almost any reason for suspicion. What looked like a routine death in old age was in reality a carefully disguised homicide supported by falsified documentation. One of the most disturbing aspects of his pattern was his choice of victims. In many cases, Shipman deliberately selected patients who appeared relatively stable or even in good health shortly before their deaths. This ensured that when they died suddenly, the event could be attributed to common causes like heart attacks or strokes, conditions that are statistically frequent in older populations. Because of this, the deaths rarely triggered immediate investigation. Shipman also had full control over many of the death certificates he issued. As the attending GP, he was legally allowed to certify deaths, and he often filled out these documents himself. This gave him extraordinary power over how each case was officially recorded. Families, grieving and trusting his professional judgment, rarely questioned the cause of death he provided. However, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. Over time, some relatives noticed his unusual behavior during visits following a death. Instead of appearing emotionally affected or professionally solemn, Shipman often seemed unusually calm, even detached. In some instances, his demeanor was described as almost indifferent, which, in hindsight, appeared deeply unsettling. Despite these small observations, no immediate action was taken. In a busy healthcare system, individual deaths of elderly patients rarely stood out on their own. But when viewed over a longer period, a troubling pattern began to form. The number of deaths occurring within Shipman's patient list was significantly higher than what would normally be expected for a general practice. Statistically, the figures were becoming difficult to ignore. Even among elderly populations, such a concentration of deaths in a single doctor's care was highly unusual. Within the medical community, quiet discussions began. Some colleagues started to sense that something was not right, but the idea that a trusted family doctor could be responsible for harming patients seemed almost unimaginable. This disbelief allowed the pattern to continue unchecked. Doubt existed, but it remained unspoken, scattered, and insufficient to trigger a formal investigation. Shipman, meanwhile, maintained his calm professional image, operating in plain sight while the true scale of his actions remained hidden beneath layers of medical paperwork and professional trust.
For more than 2 decades, Harold Shipman had managed to evade suspicion. He had hidden behind his reputation as a trusted doctor, altered medical records, and signed death certificates that helped disguise his crimes. To the outside world, he remained a respected member of the community. But in 1998, a single death would unravel the carefully constructed web of deception he had built over the years. The turning point came with the death of Kathleen Grundy, an 81-year-old widow, former mayor, and one of Shipman's long-term patients. Kathleen was known as an intelligent, independent woman who remained active despite her age. Friends and family described her as healthy and mentally sharp. Therefore, when news spread that she had died suddenly at home, many were surprised, but they trusted Shipman's explanation that her death had been from natural causes. Initially, nothing seemed unusual. Shipman had attended to her, certified the death, and the case appeared closed. However, events soon took a dramatic turn when Kathleen's family received shocking news. A will had surfaced shortly after her death. According to the document, Kathleen had supposedly decided to leave her entire estate, worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, not to her family, but to Harold Shipman himself. The claim was astonishing. Her daughter, Angela Woodruff, an experienced lawyer, immediately found the document suspicious. She knew her mother well and could not believe that she would leave everything to her doctor while excluding her own family. As she examined the will more closely, even more warning signs appeared. The document looked amateurish and poorly prepared. There were formatting errors, unusual wording, and details that did not match the standards of a professionally drafted legal will. To Angela, it appeared less like an authentic legal document and more like a clumsy forgery. Rather than accepting the explanation, she began asking questions. Angela reported her concerns to the police and requested a formal investigation. What started as a potential fraud case soon became something much darker. Detectives examined the circumstances surrounding Kathleen Grundy's death and became increasingly suspicious of Shipman. To determine the true cause of death, authorities made the rare decision to exhume her body. The results were devastating. Forensic tests revealed significant levels of diamorphine, a powerful opioid drug, in her system. The amount present was far beyond what could be explained by normal medical treatment and indicated that she had died from a lethal overdose. Suddenly, the respected family doctor was no longer viewed as a trusted physician. He had become the prime suspect in a murder investigation. As police dug deeper, they uncovered even more incriminating evidence. Investigators seized Shipman's computer records and analyzed the digital files connected to his patients. What they discovered was a critical mistake that Shipman had failed to hide. Computer logs showed that patient records had been altered after the victims had already died. The timestamps revealed that Shipman had returned to medical files after deaths and inserted information about illnesses, symptoms, and health problems that had never been recorded while the patients were alive. These edits appeared designed to create a medical explanation for deaths that had already occurred. The digital evidence formed a trail leading directly back to him. For years, Shipman had believed he could control every aspect of his crimes: his victims, the medical records, and the official causes of death. But the computer system had preserved a history of changes that he could not completely erase. What began as a suspicious will was now exposing a far larger and more horrifying truth. Detectives started reviewing other deaths connected to Shipman, and with each case, the possibility grew that Kathleen Grundy was not his only victim. The investigation was about to reveal one of the most shocking serial murder cases in modern British history.
Following the discovery of evidence in Kathleen Grundy's case, investigators realized they might be dealing with something far larger than a single murder. What had started as an inquiry into a suspicious will quickly expanded into one of the biggest criminal investigations in British history. Detectives began reviewing the deaths of Harold Shipman's former patients. They examined medical records, death certificates, prescription histories, and computer files dating back many years. Teams of investigators worked tirelessly, comparing patterns of deaths across different periods of Shipman's career. The results were shocking. Again and again, investigators found similarities between cases. Many victims were elderly women who had been living independently and were not considered terminally ill. Numerous deaths occurred when Shipman was the last known person to see the patient alive. In many instances, he personally certified the death and recorded causes that appeared questionable when reviewed later. As the audit expanded, the scale of the tragedy became increasingly clear. The number of deaths associated with Shipman's practice was extraordinarily high, far beyond what statisticians and medical experts considered normal. While proving every individual murder was impossible, investigators became convinced that the true number of victims extended into the hundreds. The growing evidence stunned the nation. People who had trusted Shipman for years struggled to comprehend the accusations. Families began questioning the deaths of loved ones they had buried long ago. Some relatives who never doubted the official explanations suddenly faced the horrifying possibility that their family members had been murdered. By 1999, prosecutors believed they had gathered enough evidence to bring Shipman to trial. The case attracted enormous public attention. Newspapers across Britain followed every development, and the courtroom was filled with journalists, investigators, and grieving relatives seeking answers. During the trial, prosecutors presented a vast collection of evidence. Medical experts explained how victims had died from lethal doses of diamorphine. Forensic specialists detailed the drug findings and the circumstances surrounding the deaths. Computer analysts demonstrated how Shipman had altered patient records after death, creating false medical histories to support natural causes. The forged will of Kathleen Grundy became one of the most damaging pieces of evidence. Prosecutors argued that it demonstrated not only murder, but also an attempt to profit from a victim's death. Combined with the medical records and forensic findings, it helped establish a pattern of deliberate and calculated behavior. The prosecution painted a chilling portrait of Shipman, a man who used his position as a trusted doctor to exercise complete control over life and death. They argued that his crimes were not impulsive acts, but carefully planned murders carried out over many years. Yet, throughout the proceedings, Shipman remained remarkably unmoved. Unlike many convicted killers who eventually confess, express regret, or attempt to justify their actions, Shipman did none of these things. He maintained his innocence from beginning to end. He denied the accusations, rejected the evidence presented against him, and showed little visible emotion. Observers noted his cold and detached demeanor. Even as families described the devastating impact of losing loved ones, Shipman appeared calm and indifferent. He offered no explanation for the altered records, no meaningful response to the forensic evidence, and no insight into what might have motivated his actions. His attitude struck many people as arrogant. Rather than appearing frightened by the overwhelming evidence, he often seemed dismissive of the proceedings. This lack of remorse only deepened public outrage. After weeks of testimony and careful examination of the evidence, the jury reached its decision. In January 2000, Harold Shipman was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forging Kathleen Grundy's will. The verdict confirmed what many investigators had come to believe. A trusted family doctor had systematically murdered his own patients. The judge described the crimes as exceptionally grave and imposed a life sentence. Given the severity of the offenses and the danger Shipman posed, it was recommended that he should never be released from prison. For the victims' families, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but not closure. Many questions remained unanswered, including the most important one of all. Why had Harold Shipman done it? Shipman refused to explain, taking his secrets with him as he began serving his sentence behind bars.
The conviction of Harold Shipman marked the end of one of the most shocking murder trials in British history. But it was far from the end of the story. Questions remained about how a single doctor had been able to kill for so many years without being stopped. In response to public outrage, the British government launched a massive independent investigation known as the Shipman Inquiry. Led by senior judge Dame Janet Smith, the inquiry spent years examining thousands of medical records, witness statements, and official documents. What investigators uncovered was even more horrifying than many had feared. The inquiry concluded that Harold Shipman had murdered at least 215 patients between 1975 and 1998. However, experts believed that figure represented only the minimum number that could be proven. After reviewing additional suspicious deaths, investigators suggested that the true total could exceed 250 victims. If accurate, this would make him one of the deadliest serial killers in recorded history. The overwhelming majority of his victims were elderly women. Many had trusted him completely, welcoming him into their homes and relying on him for medical care. Instead, Shipman used that trust as a weapon. The inquiry also exposed serious weaknesses within the healthcare system. Numerous warning signs had been missed over the years. Concerns raised by colleagues had not been properly investigated. Unusual death rates had gone unnoticed. Systems designed to protect patients had failed to detect a pattern that in hindsight seemed impossible to ignore. The revelations sent shockwaves throughout the United Kingdom. Public confidence in the medical profession was shaken, and the National Health Service faced intense scrutiny. The government responded by introducing major reforms intended to prevent anything similar from happening again. Procedures for certifying deaths were strengthened. Independent reviews of death certificates became more rigorous. Monitoring of controlled medications was improved. Regulatory bodies gained greater authority to investigate concerns about doctors, and systems were introduced to identify unusual patterns in medical practice much earlier. Many of these reforms were directly linked to lessons learned from the Shipman case. Yet, despite years of investigation, one mystery remained unsolved. Why did he do it? Harold Shipman never offered a meaningful explanation. He never confessed to the murders. He never expressed genuine remorse. He never revealed what drove him to abuse his position and systematically kill the people who trusted him most. The answers died with him. On January 13, 2004, while serving a life sentence at Wakefield Prison, Shipman was found hanging in his cell. Prison staff attempted to respond, but he was pronounced dead shortly afterward. This death closed the possibility of a full confession forever. For the families of the victims, there would be no final explanation, no insight into his motives, and no opportunity to hear him acknowledge the pain he had caused. Many were left with unanswered questions that remain unresolved to this day. Harold Shipman's crimes continue to stand as one of the darkest betrayals of trust in modern history. A doctor is expected to heal, protect, and save lives. Shipman did the opposite. He used his authority of his profession to conceal murder, exploiting a system built on trust and compassion. His story remains a chilling reminder that evil does not always appear frightening or suspicious. Sometimes it wears a white coat, carries a medical bag, and earns the complete confidence of an entire community. More than 20 decades after his conviction, the name Harold Shipman still serves as a warning about the dangers of unchecked authority, institutional failures, and the devastating consequences that can occur when trust is abused. The victims are remembered not for how they died, but for the lives they lived, and for the lessons their loss taught a nation determined to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. And with this, our story ends. If you liked the story, then like it and subscribe to hear more such stories.